Good evening. We have Alain O'Dea here of St. John, Newfoundland, Canada, who is a Haskeller and then a early user of our product, the Haskell Center. So we want to talk to him to see what the experience is and what his recommendations might be for new products, etc. So thank you, Alain, for taking the time to talk to us. So to start off with, could you describe a little bit about yourself, your business, your programming career? And so we know where you're coming from.
Sure. My background originally, I come from a computer engineering background, so I did computer engineering at Memorial University of Newfoundland. I worked as a user experience analyst, oddly enough, for IBM for a little while, and then I came here to Newfoundland to work for Verafin on an anti-fraud and anti-money laundering product, I've been working there for the past 7 years. My background is primarily in Java, so I've been doing a lot of Java programming for the past 7 years, and I've always had an interest in getting to a point where code reuse could be better and easier to achieve, and that's really where my interests kind of dove into functional programming and particularly into Haskell because it seemed to sort of be the nirvana of code reuse.
Explain a little bit your business. Who are you working with right now?
I work with Verafin Incorporated. It's a local software business here in Newfoundland, and we do the purpose of Verafin's purpose is to use technology to essentially help the fight against financial crime. So we detect fraud and we detect money laundering using AI techniques. So it's it's an interesting business.
Is Haskell involved or not?
Haskell is not involved in my day-to-day work now.
Okay. Is one of your goals to try to get that in your company?
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
Okay.
I imagine there'll be a long road to hoe there, but I think that Haskell has really got high potential for that use, particularly when it comes to the AI capabilities and other things like that. Haskell's strength in domain-specific languages and its strength in code reuse, I think, would really help us get a lot more done with less time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's get into that a little bit. So you mentioned before you looked at functional programming language. And so did you have, and then specifically, you think Haskell is, I think your quote is nirvana of development languages. Did you have a specific problem you want to solve or dissatisfaction per se that you looked into functional programming, or is it just out of curiosity you always want to improve things?
Mainly out of curiosity that I always wanted to improve things. I mean, I didn't actually know there were real problems with Java, and I think this is probably a common thing with many people who are in the industry. I felt that Java coming into learning Haskell, I felt that Java was a really strong language and had no real obvious barriers that I'd run up against. But as soon as I started learning Haskell, I found that there were barriers everywhere. In
Right.
interesting ways. Just there's lots of extra code you have to write.
Right.
It's hard to do certain kinds of abstractions in terms of functional decomposition and refactoring. A lot of the stuff that Uncle Bob talks about in clean code is very difficult to do in Java and very, very easy to do in Haskell. And that's the kind of thing that I ran up against. Is it's just easier to write code and it's easier to write good code.
Right, right. So it's a classic case of, and we see that too, and we're trying to proselytize that. People are not aware of another way or approach. They just assume this is the way it has been, Java, C++, and that's just the way it is, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's only after you got into it, then you see the contrast, then you realize, well, how is it all different, and then you became a believer that way.
Absolutely, and I've been encouraging people, particularly any work term students we have, because they tend to be really, really open minded. I've been encouraging them to take a look at Haskell, and they've generally been impressed. Like what one guy came in, he was very much into Python, really impressed by Python. I said, you'll find a lot of similarities in terms of the ease of programming in Haskell, as you will in Python, but you get the performance and you get the static typing. So I think so far he's been impressed, and I think it's going to change his perspective on programming.
Right. That's what we've been hearing a lot. Can you cite some specifics in terms of the difference, sort of before and after, in terms of, I don't know, errors, productivity, the problem versus the benefits and the differences that you found, length of code, etc. Time to fix
I haven't
things.
really done any metrics, but my impression, and I think this is the thing that will really make a difference for a lot of people. My impression with a lot of programming languages is that you start with, especially if it's an easy programming language to start with, something like Ruby or Python or JavaScript. You can get something done and it works really quickly, but then your confidence drops as time goes on because there
Hmm.
aren't any guardrails
Hmm.
that types provide. Java provides those guardrails, but doesn't really give you any quick wins. You have to work really, really hard to get things working, and it's a lot of typing, a lot of programming to get it to
Hmm.
work. No IDEs help, but still, it's a lot of stuff to read through. It's also harder to read the language
Right.
that I find. With Haskell, I found the opposite. I found that not only is it relatively easy to get started. I mean, there are some barriers to getting a program started with it, but my confidence in the program increases over time. I don't
Hmm.
lose. I don't lose my flying speed. I find that when I'm writing with Haskell, I get to I get to a point where I can have continuous productivity. It takes a while to get up to that point,
Hmm.
but I can have continuous productivity. Whereas with a program that I write in Java, or a program I write in Python or Ruby or in JavaScript, I find that productivity drops over time because I start to
Hmm.
lose confidence that my code's going to continue to work. I still write I write lots of unit tests when I'm
Hmm.
using those languages, but the unit tests don't give you the coverage that's a strong type system does. Not to say
Sure.
you shouldn't write unit tests in Haskell, which I think you definitely should, but you have to write
Right.
so far fewer tests to get that
Right.
confidence.
Right. Right. Okay, that's pretty consistent. So now you tried other functional languages as well?
Yes, I've programmed a fair bit in Erlang, and Erlang
Hmm.
is allows fairly uncontrolled side effects, which I mean it's very useful and very easy to do some things with it. But I guess, but again, I found that the challenge I had with Erlang was a confidence that things would stay working because
Hmm.
you aren't there's no compile time guardrails that you
Hmm.
get with strong typing. They have pattern matching, and it's good pattern matching. And
Hmm.
I actually learned Erlang before I learned Haskell. But and other than that, I learned Prolog, which is a logic programming language, while I was in university. I found it arcane and kind of hard to work with,
Yeah.
but
Uh-huh.
it was interesting. It opened my mind to the possibility that there are radically
Hmm.
different things. The big challenge
Hmm.
for me in going from more liberal functional programming like Erlang to Haskell is actually true functional programming. I know there are people who are probably not going to like that I'm going to say that,
Hmm.
but Haskell requires you to write functional programs
Right.
unless you're writing in the in monads or the IO monad. But if you're writing a typical Haskell program in pure language, you have to write true functional programming. You can't
Right.
just write to the network or read from the network or read from the disk. You have to actually organize that, and it
Right.
forces you to think about those things in a more disciplined manner.
Right.
It's very different from imperative programming. You can get away with writing very imperative style things in Erlang, and quite often things that I've worked with, projects I've worked on, have used that style. So Haskell requires you to think differently, and
Right.
I like the way it makes me think.
Yeah. No, we talked to a developer at New York Times yesterday too, and he had a big project. That's one of his central points as well. It forces you to think through the problem and design it, from the start, and using the type system, the inference system, etc. So as opposed to just go start hacking, and yeah, you could easily just hack stuff, and then get something going, and then after that, then you sort of got to untangle yourself out from that. And so it's a very different approach.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So now you recently, I think, bought a copy of the our product, the Haskell Center, and so first of all, what was your motivation? Was it just curiosity, or is it you think there must be a better way than your existing tool chain, how to set it up, or what?
My motivation with purchasing the personal edition of Haskell Center was really to keep myself on track with Haskell. I feel that the thing that was missing for me was being able to get a consistent and workable tool chain for Haskell. I know that there's really good support in Emacs. I just have never really learned Emacs. As I found FB Haskell Center, I immediately understood how it worked, and it provides me with immediate feedback and very clear paths to the errors that I bump into. I found I've actually learned more about Haskell in the last few months working with FB Haskell Center that I've learned in a very long time, because I have that immediate feedback loop.
Wow, that's great. Okay.
I think the feedback loop that, and I know there are a lot of people who disagree with the use of IDs, but I think the feedback loop that an IDE that provides you with immediate error feedback is huge. And I think that's why people like using things like Emacs, is because you can actually get that feedback loop. I've just, again, I say, I've never learned Emacs. No, I don't. I've never worked with anyone who's ever used Emacs. That's probably usual in the industry, but I mean, I've always, I think in the Java industry, everyone uses, or most people use IDEs like Eclipse or IntelliJ. So for me, that transition was much easier from those tools, the Java land tools, to FB Haskell Center than it would be to a tool like Emacs. I was traditionally doing most of my Haskell development in TextMate and Sublime Text, so with no real tool support aside from running GHC, and it's not as handy as having the IDE tell you where your errors are.
Sure.
And being able to have all that information together, having Hoogle and your type information all in the same place.
Right. Well, that's one of the benefits that we provide, the convenience factor, because one of the things we found is the current tool chain, from the classic open source background of this language, is you got to assemble all your parts together by yourself effectively, and one of the key issues to a lot of people, that's a barrier. You got to go through the time, the effort, the frustration, all that kind of stuff. A lot of work just to get started. Now I can really do something with this thing, and you exhaust yourself trying to get it, to there. So we're trying to avoid that, and so far we've gotten pretty good reviews about that. But I'm very interested in some of these, what you just said. You learn more about Haskell by using a product in it with immediate feedback you get. That's how you learn, right? What's wrong, what's correct, right?
Absolutely.
So do you have some specific examples of operations or whatever you did that this helped you with?
Well, one thing immediately, I knew the capabilities of things like doing things with new type and with data structures in Haskell. I'm talking about fairly basic stuff. I think. Well, I consider it basic now. But doing recursive data structure. For example, I was building a data structure to represent the machine specifications for SmartOS, and it's a relatively simple data structure, but it's got a lot of fields in it, and it forced me to really, really, really practice the syntax of declaring new types, and it made me learn a lot about. I initially wrote a lot of my own instances of things for ESON. Like ESON is the JSON parser, or is a JSON parser library in Haskell, and I was writing my own instances of 2JSON for all of my data structures, and I realized there's actually a thing that does this. Like GHC actually has generic or generalized new type deriving as an extension. So all I have to do is ask it to make its own, and it works. That kind of thing I find fascinating, because the language has such strong typing. In a lot of cases, the language can actually, from type information, build working instances of interfaces effectively. I mean, or of type classes. Type classes work kind of like interfaces for the Java folks in the audience. I really found that that made an enormous difference, because it cut the amount of code I had to write by at least a factor of two, probably a factor of 4 or 5, right? Because it was quite dense code, because you're talking about a data structure with about probably 20 or 30 different fields in it for different aspects of a cloud operating system, and yeah, it's nice to be able to have the language do the heavy lifting for me.
Great. Okay. And any other examples? Because these are the real life cases we want to get out of the product, because we're trying to promote that to use cases, anything we could demonstrate the real bits of uses that people can get out from.
Oh yeah. No, one of the things I found really interesting, the thing that actually got me into FP Haskell Center was reading Michael Snoyman's book on USOD, and
Right.
just the idea that with a type system you can get a secure web application. I mean, secure web
Right.
application is obviously enormously important in the business I'm in. We provide software as a service for banks, and
Sure.
it's a lot of work to make sure you have a correct web application. Like, we do a lot of
Yep.
static analysis, we do a lot of really thorough code review,
Sure.
and the thought that could all just be almost handed to you by the type system as it is in USOD is incredible. And I played around with things. I tried to do cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery attacks against my own applications I've built in USOD, and it's not trivial to make that mistake. You have to
Right.
really try, and it's like most web frameworks. You get into that kind of trap very easily. It's very easy
Mm-hmm.
to create a cross-site scripting vulnerability, for example, and you just don't
Mm-hmm.
even know. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
trying to even create a cross-site scripting vulnerability in USOD, you kind of have to try to do it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably not very hard to achieve, but you have to try, and it's not just going to happen to you. It's not going to come and bite.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
those are the kind of advantages you get with the type system, and it's a radical thing when you can have that type system, and you can also have the convenience of short code and web templates, and not have to write a lot of code and still have the type system.
Right. Right. Cool. Okay. Any others?
I'm trying to think now. I've dig through a lot of the things I've done with Haskell in and out over the years. I've frequently used it as a tool on the side, not necessarily to build any product, because we don't have other Haskell developers at the moment, but I've used it to do data analysis, and I found it really handy to be able to conveniently reflect text-based data files into real, or I guess like real data structures within a language, and be able to operate with them at that level rather than operating with them operating
Mm-hmm.
at the mechanical level. I found that it's very easy to do that kind of thing in Haskell. Take data and turn it into something more representative of the domain. I found it's good for that. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, no, I think you represent one of our, typical use cases where you are, sort of experienced Haskell programmer, but for a variety of reasons, your current employer is not using Haskell, and maybe there's a thought of hoping to do some of that. So, are you using some of this, maybe to do some prototypes to show the powers that be in the company that this is worthwhile trying, or have a segment of your system using Haskell for and all the benefits that you and the company could have?
Absolutely, yeah. And I've been looking into one for using it on the tooling side for doing my own work, and I've
Right.
been showing colleagues some of the capabilities. But I've also been working towards being able to demonstrate its capabilities for doing type safe services in an SOA situation. So
Mm-hmm.
we're switching to we're switching gradually to service-oriented architecture, because as you scale up an application, it becomes complicated when it's monolithic. But if you break it apart, it makes it scale. You can make it scale better. That's a very thin
Right.
way of describing that, but
Mm-hmm.
when you do that, though, you lose the advantage. Generally speaking, you lose the advantage of typing, because when you're calling other classes within the same Java infrastructure, you have some of the protections of the Java type system, and the same thing in Haskell. But quite often, when you go to web services or things like that, you lose that kind of type safety. And this is where I think something like YSOD is very powerful, because you still have the type safety even though you're calling over the wire. So you have that ability to have a type safe service oriented architecture, which is something that trying to achieve that in Java would require a lot of fooling around to do correctly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's turn this a little bit to the deployment options, because right now we offer, as you may know, for the personal and the professional too. So the deployment is shared, a free shared sort of deployment sort of opportunity. What do you have thoughts about as you move forward with this? Let's say just on your own. Do you have any desire? And we're designing our next sort of version of the product coming up in 2-3 months. Do we need to put deployment options into the personal edition for people like you that you want to deploy little things or to show your bosses whatever we want to do? What's your thoughts on that?
At the moment, I've actually found just using the using the demo capabilities of the personal edition works well enough for that purpose. In terms of just being able to demonstrate working web services and stuff like that, and being able to show the ability to download the binary and just run it on any Linux system immediately, and the speed of those applications is quite impressive. We're likely to run this stuff in our own house for the most part. But yeah, for me, the existing download options and the existing demoing options in the personal edition are quite sound. I can see it being very nice to be able to use the application servers, but I haven't gotten to the point yet where I'm asking my employer to pay for those capabilities. But I could see that happening at some point in the future.
Well, especially in our roadmap and by popular demand and needs for enterprises, they want things behind the firewall. A lot of people, right, for security or some psychology. AWS is not secure enough, but our stuff is secure. Okay.
We're going through that transition now. I know that public cloud providers can be made secure. It's largely what it really comes down to, Ken, is where your responsibilities start and where the cloud provider's responsibilities end. And for the most part, that means you have host defenses, you have encryption, you have encrypted communications, and that's really what it comes down to. The cloud is not a security issue. The cloud is the cloud's a threat to traditional IT. I think that's the biggest thing that you're going to run up against in enterprise is that traditional IT will fight the cloud, not because it's not the right thing to do, but because it's not the way they do things.
And job security, somebody expect,
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally understand that. I mean, it's seen as a threat to their way of life. I don't really see it that way because I think that when it comes to doing things in terms of infrastructure as code, a lot of traditional IT approaches apply that. It's just it's a mindset shift, and but I can definitely see the applicability of being able to deploy a FP complete application server behind a firewall, because even potentially for latency advantages, that could be applicable as well. But there are those folks who can't bear to run things in the cloud. I find that funny though.
Right. Okay. No, you've been very, very helpful and illuminating in some of these topics. I've got a couple more, and then I think I'll let you go. You spent a good amount of time with us. One is the commercial adoption, because obviously we are a commercial company. We want to push for that, and so we're always looking for ideas from actual users such as yourself. What are some suggestions you might have on how to pitch your colleagues or bosses, convince them to try Haskell? What are the ways and tools that you can suggest?
I mean, to my mind, USOD is a really compelling use case for commercial use. I mean, just as a replacement for many other simple web application, web service technologies that exist today, things like Ruby and other platforms like that can easily be replaced with USOD. Give you much greater soundness in terms of the security of your system, and also considerably faster. I mean, the difference between a USOD application and a Rails application in terms of performance is they're not even in the same ballpark. I mean, a USOD application can handle considerable numbers of concurrent connections, whereas the Rails application just can't stand that, right? So that's a big difference. Performance may not be the big thing, but I think that the ability to go from a prototype with USOD to a full system and to have support for things like persona authentication and databases and rich concurrency and transactional memory. These things just has to provide so much in the terms of make it work in the small and make it work at massive scale. I mean, this goes from your startups to all the way up to Facebook. I mean, Simon Marlowe was talking about some of the incredible stuff they've done at Facebook with Haskell, and Haskell makes these things possible. It makes it possible to do really, really small things easily and really, really huge things as well.
Right. Yeah, I think as we're talking to the New York Times guy, we basically say it's a prototype that's meant to last because the specification effect could be the code. I mean, if you do it well, that's big. So with these kind of, sort of facts and sort of convincing arguments, what are the barriers? Let's say your colleagues or other people have that you talked to. So, okay, why aren't people moving faster? And that sounds to me like game-changing benefits. So what are the barriers to really changing?
I think the biggest barrier is the perception that Haskell is hard, and it is false. But people have that perception that Haskell is hard. But I think that when people have things like the School of Haskell, FB Complete School of Haskell, and which I've demonstrated people, and also the IDE, which provides that immediate feedback, all of a sudden, a lot of that difficulty goes away. I think a lot of the difficulty comes from just a lack of tooling, and I think that you guys, having built an IDE, kind of answers the tooling problem for for most developers. I know there are people who, again, see the IDE as not the solution. I really do, because you look at the vast majority of programmers use IDEs. And they'll really benefit. The transition from for a traditional Java developer to Haskell would mainly be just kicking the tires and seeing where they run into errors. That's the way I learned Java. It's the way almost everyone else did. I think that people can learn Haskell the same way. People need to be able to be given a rapid feedback environment, and the faster the environment can give feedback, the more the people can learn, and the faster they can learn.
One last thing. Any constructive suggestions of new features, capabilities for a product? Refactoring for sure. If there was refactoring support in FE Haskell Center, I think it would be incredible. That's again another one of these sort of working towards parity for what Java developers have come to expect. Right. The ability, Haskell is inherently easier to refactor than Java, which makes it so they don't generally need tools to refactor it. But having the IDE provide refactoring is a nice checkpoint for a lot of people. Right. Cool. No, I think that's definitely in the roadmap. I mean, that's not a simple thing to do well. Also, okay. So yeah, so it's definitely in the roadmap. We hear that a lot. So that's one of our standard lists. Okay, great. Now, finally, that we saw from your tweet that your wife gave you this personal copy as a birthday present. That is correct. Amazing woman. Yes, absolutely. Claudia is always incredibly supportive of my learning, and what she has done is, in terms of facilitating my learning and encouraging me to learn, encouraging me to seek new challenges, despite the time it takes, is really incredible. And I really appreciate that she does that for me. So I'm saying she gets diamond, you get a copy of the FE Haskell Center. Is that right? So. That's right. So okay. Good trade-off, I can see. Yes, right. Okay, great. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Definitely keep in touch. Okay? Absolutely.